Hey everyone, welcome to the Launchpad. I'm here. Finally get to interview the elusive Selina Medina. When we met, I don't know, months ago, I wanted to get you on a call and ask you questions. You're like, I can't now. But the planets have aligned finally,
Yep.
and we finally get to sit down and pick your brain and ask you some questions and get to know you a little bit better because, I do believe Matt was really impressed with you. I mean, he knew who you were, and I think it's important for us to kind of share with everyone who you really are and what you've been doing, behind the scenes for so long. You've been working to safeguard the tattoo industry from behind in the background, and now it's time to bring you to the foreground and share what you've been doing. So, as usual, Selena, I'd like to let you start off with your origin story. We're all tattooers, so kind of share with us where you're from, how you got into tattooing, and then we'll take it from there.
Cool. My name's Selina. Thank you very much for hosting me on the Tattoo Smart program. Super happy to be here and be a partner in kind of this transition that our industry is going through right now. Obviously the first shock value of somebody wanting to regulate our industry or regulate our products is kind of like, whoa, pump the brakes, like, hold on a second. And I remember the first time that I heard that as a tattoo artist, it compelled me to make a series of decisions that actually led me to where I'm at today. And
Awesome.
one of the initial parts about my particular story with tattooing is I got started at 16 years old. I was living in a car. It was kind of a do or die desperate situation. I was homeless. I wasn't in a good situation, and tattooing was kind of my savior out of that type of issue. And one of the things that kind of brought me to tattooing was the freedom around it, but also the connection that I developed with my clients. And from the beginning, I've always been super conscious about health and safety and, all of those types of things. So every time there was a new question or something that would come up, I'd find myself asking a series of questions or in like a habitual way of finding the next best expert. Like, is there a doctor that I can talk to? Is there, I don't know, a neurologist that I can call or an immunologist or something? Like, is there somebody that I can talk to? And when the first wave of the tattoo inks issues kind of started back in 2017, it was a drastic shock to go, wait a minute, there could be micro contamination in my sealed tattoo inks in my finished product, and I may have unknowingly put that on somebody. No, that's not okay. So I found myself in kind of just like really a rabbit hole because I didn't really know where to look at anything, where to find any information. There was no clarity about the situation. All you see are these letters that are put out by the FDA, and you kind of go, what does that actually mean? So I printed them off and I went to my buddy who, she's an ER surgeon. She fixes little babies whenever they fall or they get broken and, they wind up with surgery or something like that. She's the ER doc that's on call. And she took one look at the paperwork and she kind of went, hey man, this is some nasty stuff that they're talking about that's in these. So, I'd probably start calling some of the manufacturers and I'd start asking some questions and kind of see how they do things and see if their products are safer than somebody else's, or, is there something different that they're doing that somebody else might not be doing that wound up with that? Well, after a few phone calls and finally leading into this whole plethora of stuff, I met a couple different tattooers and some industry folks and partnered up with a company, world famous. And then we were faced with this giant monster. Welcome to the global gobsmack EU and the banning of blue and green. And then I kind of felt, if blue and green's being banned, why? Why is blue and green being banned? Is there any scientific evidence that provides some kind of clarity around this? Is there something that tells us why? Is there a suitable alternative? And then I kind of made it my life's mission to go down that path, and anything that had to do with regulatory affairs, science, analytics, chemistry. That just became like my focus. And really, I was in a process of retiring from tattooing shortly during COVID, because EU kind of started kind of just like creeping in, and it took up all my time. I was working about 100 hours a week on some of that stuff. And, you know, that's a lot when you have a family. It's also a lot when you've got a partner and you have a business and you're trying to tattoo. So eventually I decided, okay, maybe it's my time. Maybe I need to step back from tattooing a little bit and focus on this. And then it kind of dawned on me. I was like, that's the part that made me cool, is that I still tattooed and I still understood what this stuff meant. Like, I understood the science behind it too. So we got through to the market and we were able to successfully launch products in the EU that were compliant with the new REACH legislation. And that taught me some incredibly invaluable experience, but it also gave me kind of another path into helping. And that's the world of nonprofit work. And that's really where I've been focused, is nonprofit work through the AFTO organization and through the APT. I am a former board of directors from the APT, and I believe that we were able to basically pull the APT from the brink of extinction during the period of time where I was involved with the board, to get new leadership in place and kind of call in the old guard and say, hey guys, like, you know, you started this back, I don't know, 1990, whatever, you know, can you help us out? Because I don't really know what to do here. And then working with AFTO, it was kind of just like a means how to influence and try to like help in the background. My skill sets rely more around like project management, documentation, development of slides, like core comprehension tools that are necessary for dealing with regulatory people. So when you have that like weird skill set, you kind of find yourself in a lot of conversations. And the one conversation that kept coming back was, our industry really doesn't know what's going on. And then that's when you called me and were like, hey, what's MOCRA? What does that actually mean? It's like, well, it's cosmetics. And in the United States, they call tattooing cosmetics. And there's a series of additional laws and things that are done for cosmetic products that in theory sound great for tattooing, but as our industry's a lot newer than some of these older industries from cosmetics, we're at a disadvantage. So I'm kind of in the background, but on like the firing squad and working with everybody shoulder to shoulder to try to level that playing field and give our industry some kind of equal playing ground. Because the reality is, from the CGMP listening session that was earlier last week, we had a lot of, major companies in there. We're talking like L'Oreal, Estee Lauder, giant corporations that have unlimited amount of money to spend in research and development. And most of the times our product manufacturers are not at that level, or they're not there yet. And some of those companies were trying to speak for us, and I'm not okay with that. So I think in the partnerships that have come since, I want to say about January is when everybody kind of started coming forward. It's like, wow, this is really nice. Like there are people that actually hear what I'm saying. 1, 2, I don't feel alone with this stuff, because it's been kind of isolating and polarizing in a lot of different ways. Because, I've lost relationships. I've lost friends over this. I've lost different things over the years because I've had people look at me and go, no, the FDA is not going to do anything. Well, unfortunately, that's not true. Now we're here. So, yeah.
Yeah. Lots to unpack there, Selina.
I know.
Wow,
sorry.
You just threw that fire hose on and boom, went from 2016 to FDA's here at us. So
yeah,
I'd love to kind of come back and digest some of it, because there's so many tidbits of
Mhm.
knowledge you're just throwing down, and so many. I think almost every statement you and sentence you said could probably have a TED talk with it. So let's kind of go back to the you started tattooing, back in the early 2000s,
Mhm.
but it was probably, less than a decade in your career. You started identifying some issues that got you wanting to have a conversation, got you talking to an ER doc friend. I mean, what were some of those situations that led to that conversation that kind of really got you to, throw your backpack on and start on this journey?
I'd say I had a client who was diagnosed with cancer. And that was like it was like my oh shit moment. Um, it was my oh shit moment because suddenly I was faced with a woman that her dying wish was to get a tattoo. Like, and I didn't want to tell her no, but at the same time, like also being a cancer survivor, knowing exactly what that does to the body, it frightened me, to be perfectly honest, to tattoo her. Like I was completely shocked that she even asked me. And then it wound up kind of turning a corner for me, and I felt like the tattoo had a lot more meaning for her, and I needed to find a way to do it. I just needed to find a way how to tattoo this woman, how to make her comfortable, and how to make sure that she had the best experience possible. Because when you get tattooed, obviously there's an immune response that happens to that. And if you're immunocompromised, i.e., you're some form of chemo, excuse me, some form of chemo, some kind of like radiation treatment, any of that type of stuff, you're going to be immunocompromised and you're not going to heal well. Plain and simple. So I started seeking out some of my nurse clients and just doctors in general, and just like, I'd been sick in the past. So, I had a good relationship with a neurologist that I worked with at one point. So I was able to call him and ask him questions. And then, it just kind of like started sparking things in me. I was like, I don't feel like we're looking at tattoos in like a holistic sense and like the impact of the body. So then it kind of started sparking a lot more questions for me, because I really wanted to focus on like how to offer better service. And when the lady came to me that had cancer, I was just like, this woman needs this tattoo. Like, she really needs this tattoo. This is something that's going to bring her such a modicum of peace. It's going to give her a sense of closure. It's going to make her feel, oh no, something happened on my end. Sorry. But that tattoo was going to give her such a modicum of peace, and it was going to give her such a sense of closure, that it was just like, I couldn't say no, but I also was conflicted. I was just weirdly conflicted. So I needed to understand.
Yeah, what was it that you were conflicted with?
How she was going to heal. How she was going to heal.
Because of the trauma inflicted, or?
Well, the cancer treatments itself and her tattoo not healing. And I didn't really know what was in the ink. I also didn't really know how her body was going to respond to it. And really, I was afraid that I was going to do something to hurt her. Like, yeah, tattoos hurt. We all accept this. We all understand that. But you don't ever want to do anything to your client where they're going to have some kind of irreparable harm. And especially with somebody who was dealing with cancer, like, she was already kind of like, her immune system was already depleted anyway, and she just didn't really look great to begin with. I mean,
yeah.
It was like all of those things all at one time. And then, asking those questions and like looking and digging and trying to find stuff out, it was like, oh, wait a minute. So if they have an immune response to this, then they're going to have an immune response to these other things, but she could be okay if she does these things, and it was just kind of like this little light bulb went off. And then I started looking at like autoimmune conditions, diabetes, insert various like conditions that are out there with people. And you kind of go, wait a minute, this is how we can ensure that these people can still be included in tattooing. Because tattooing is great, and tattooing is great for everybody. But if you have physical issues or you have like immunological issues, of course, like, you need to take some different provisions for that, and you may have some different outcomes for that, or your tattoo may heal differently. But it's really just kind of research and like asking questions. And I don't think the woman, I can't remember her name, but she was a nurse client of mine from like forever ago. When we sat down and we started talking about it, she was like, that's an interesting point, because I didn't think about X, Y, and Z, that this impacts an immune system. And what would the tattoo do with that? Just kind of like why haven't we talked about this before? So that's kind of been one of my like core things that I always kind of like tend to ask people about, is like, do you have any kind of health conditions? Do you have any kind of stuff going on? Do you have any allergies? Like, are there things that that give you problems? Like that kind of type stuff. Because my opinion is that every single one of the products that we use needs to have a transparent label in order to be able to read and identify any of those substances or any of those problems, and be able to communicate that with a client or pinpoint what's going on with something. Like that's really critical in my eyes. And
it was that interest and that desire to know more about, not just what's going to do to somebody's body if it's compromised, but what the ingredients are, what they could do, that led you to world famous. Is that the kind of the steps that took you there?
That was a part of the steps. I think another part of it that I didn't really understand was like a passive benefit, but wound up being more of like a focus, is it actually influenced my tattooing in a really interesting way. So the core colorants that are used are completely different chemical structures, by the way. Some of them perform differently and some of them perform lowly differently. And what I mean by that is like the concentration of the color or the levels of opacity vary with the individual pigment that's used. So being able to look at a bottle and identify what pigments are being used, it's much better alternative for an artist to understand that piece of information, as opposed to just picking a color off the rack because that color looks good. Like you can kind of predict what that color is going to look like inside the skin on that person. Or you can predict what levels of color performance that you're going to be able to do because it is identified by the labeling on that product. So it's really just as simple as like looking up what the CI numbers are, which is how we identify most colorants here in the United States on the labels. And you can kind of depict like, oh, the opacity is going to be super dark or super light, or this is going to be really suitable for a cover up, or this is really suitable for like a really translucent watercolor effect. And that kind of like understanding of the product, understanding of the chemicals or the individual ingredients, plus what the performance was really kind of like the convergence that really kind of drove me like in, I would say, the last like 5 years, more or less.
Yeah. And well, as they're saying, and it's just you wanting to be involved with the performance, the opacity and such, which like I say, kind of took you towards the manufacturing world, kind of getting in.
Yeah. It's almost impossible to get that type of information without like working and like putting in like the sweat equity, and really like understanding what the products do. And, there's no shortage for experience there. And really it was just hard-earned experience from doing the work and doing the labor and partnering with them and really just trying to say, hey, I want to fix this issue that we're having with EU, but I also want to make it better. Like, how do I absorb this stuff and keep going?
Was it going into this relationship with that EU started the regulations, or it was already happening before you kind of came?
It was starting to happen. There wasn't a lot of clarity at the time when I started with World Famous with what was happening with the EU. It was like,
and could you explain a little bit to what is going on in the EU too, or what happened at the EU?
Yeah. Okay. So back in, I say 2003 to 2008, there was a series of regulations called the RASAP REASAP or something like that. Basically, the RASAP rules were based on technical thresholds that were assessed by the Joint Research Commission, which is a government-funded organization that is kind of an EU cooperative. It's a whole bunch of scientists and dermatologists and technical experts and subject matter experts. They get together, they get in a room, they ask a series of questions, and they figure out is this an accurate model of assessment for the safety of this particular product or this particular substance? So they prescribed a table where they said, hey, this is what all of your toxic chemical threshold is supposed to be. Everything's got to meet this particular specification in order for it to be sold in the EU. So that was 2003 to 2008. 2010 rolls around and more research was done and it yielded some different results. And this is where the whole situation with the EU started kind of getting off course. And that was where we started dealing with the REACH legislation. REACH basically stands for the Research, Evaluation, Authorization of Chemicals. That's what that stands for the entire EU. And through the EU's legislative structure, countries can opt in to either use that method of regulation, or they can opt out of it. Most countries just choose to opt into it because it's just easier for them to do business, because the thought process is from REACH is it's supposed to basically remove the borders and the barriers from this country to that country, which is kind of like us just moving from state to state here. So that's what that was supposed to do. However, the numbers that they quoted in REACH are not accurate. And we have serious issues with those numbers, because the numbers and the way that they have calculated the percentage of toxic substances inside the tattoo inks is based on 100% absorption. So that's saying all the tattoo ink that's in your cup that you put there goes into the skin, which is not right. Almost every single tattoo artist will argue that point on the planet. But there were a bunch of people and there was not enough industry participation where that wound up being enacted and enforced. And it started in 2018, but at the precipice, which was 2020, that's when you had the ban of blue and green. And then in 2020, there was a authorization period and a grace period that was given by the European government that said there were 2 years for manufacturers to comply. So at the beginning of 2022, they had to have a regulatory conforming ink that fit within those technical thresholds. And it was a lot of work to do that. And it was an insane amount of economic expense on small to medium-sized manufacturers, and the financial burden and the labor burden and all the technical experts that they had to go through, the additional testing, all of this stuff. They went through absolutely everything. And in some ways, it killed some of those companies. And that was the biggest eye-opening experience for me that made me feel morally compelled to do something, was seeing that whole process kind of unfold in front of my eyes, and, you know, watching tattoo artists being intimidated by a legislation that was meant to protect them. And it made their jobs harder, and it made their lives harder, and it made it harder for people to get safe tattoos.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're saying that the REACH tolerance levels are incorrect, which I'm sure we've all at least had conversations about European tattoo artists not particularly liking to utilize REACH compliant pigments, and yet now they're mandated to use it. I mean, is there a performance issue with this, and what can we speak to about what's wrong with these EU pigments?
They're not known. They're not known substances. We haven't been using them for the last 50 to 45 years. I mean, we don't know what these colorants are. Some of that stuff is like, it's really difficult to answer. I mean, I can't tell you how many rooms I've sat in with cosmetic chemists who have multiple PhDs in some form of cosmetic chemistry or cosmetic formulation science, and them even kind of going, "What? Are you kidding me? No, that can't be right." And then them reading it and looking at me and going, "Oh no, this is not good." You know, if somebody who has a PhD in some form of chemistry looks at the regulations and immediately has problems with it, that's a big screaming red flag. And that is from government taking over something and not speaking to properly qualified experts, or partnering with an industry. Thankfully, we don't have that same issue here. At least that's what we have seen. So through the American legislative structure, we do have a little bit different wiggle room, and I think it will be more favorable for our industry here. But the people in Europe, they're still fighting this. They're still going to court. They're still spending millions of dollars in legal fees. They're still looking for answers.
We were talking about the World Congress of Tattoo and Pigment, where they were obviously talking about this, and you had just recently came back from Vienna. Was there any interesting tidbits you brought back from Europe you'd like to share about that particular conference?
Where do I even start? I don't know. That's like a whole podcast by itself. Sorry. I wrote a report that is like kind of not so great. Maybe I'll make it a little prettier and we can put it in like the Tattoo Smart, like Launchpad community, so you guys can read it. But really the highlights are stay out of the sun. If you have tattoos, stay out of the sun or use sunblock. And the dermatologist cannot impress enough using a mineral-based sunblock and its opacity and how it protects your tattoo. And mineral-based sunblock is basically a titanium dioxide-based sunblock or zinc oxide. Those are actual physical mineral barriers that cover your tattoos and prevent the ultraviolet ray from deteriorating it. And that causes the loss of color, that causes the loss of opacity, and it can produce some unfavorable effects from some kind of chemicals like interacting, because light plus a chemical creates a chemical reaction. So we are all walking science experiments. We have to start putting sunblock on ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to be really entertaining in like 50 years. And we might not know what that's going to do. Let's see.
Especially if we're utilizing pigments we haven't used before, or they're using pigments they haven't used before.
That part. Let's see.
I know there was a lot of talking about how they had obviously created tolerances that are incorrect, and what was their kind of current fight with that? Like, what were they were trying to do with the European government to kind of reverse or head back towards a more favorable tolerances?
So there's a revisiting in the petition, and there was something that we found while I was there that basically said if the legislation is not attainable and it's not a reasonable means of attaining, it does not get to stand in court. And that was pretty interesting when I did speak to the European attorney that was appointed on the particular petitions. The conversation kind of went something around the nature of, hey, I read this thing in the European research reports, and it says like, if nobody can meet these qualifications in like a consistent method, or it doesn't promote there's not like, it's not economical, or it's like cost prohibitive, or like something of that nature, that means that the legislation can be revisited. He agreed with me.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that they do something with that piece of information, because he was pretty specific about wanting to know like where that was written and what document, and I was able to show it to him and give it to him. So I'm hoping that they do something with that. I do know that the Save the Ink campaign guys, they do have another hearing coming up, and they've got some new evidence that they're going to submit with it. But I think like the Achilles heel for them right now is that they don't have an accurate model that says this is how much ink actually goes into the skin, so that the proper calculations can be deducted from that, so that they can really say, oh, this is good, or no, this is bad.
I didn't know if you're raising your hand over there, Matt.
I jump in really quick. Are you familiar with I remember Wolfgang Ballmer's work from 2015. So he's got an article that he claimed that it's about 30%.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah.
I did talk to Mr. Wolfgang while I was there. He is just like the loveliest of humans. He's really just a fantastic guy. He really loves our community. He is super favorable to tattooing. And when he said something about the 30% threshold, I don't know if that piece of research was like validated by another form. When I talked to, let's see who I talked to. I talked to a toxicologist probably a couple of years ago, and we said something about those tolerances that Mr. Baumler had put together. And I think it required like another form of testing or like another phase of like validation in order to get through like an applicable like means or something. But I'd be curious to know where he's at with that. That was not the discussion that I really focused on with him while I was there. I was talking with some other things, more historical evidence based, but I'd be interested to know like where he's at with that type of research and like if it was applicable to today, given what's going on with, say, the evidence that it's almost impossible for these manufacturers to comply with these pieces of legislation because they weren't made with tattoo ink in mind. They were made for cosmetics. They're not made for the inks that we use. And in some ways that's good, but in some ways that's bad because like there's no precedence for us. So we're kind of shooting in the dark trying to figure out what's going to happen with our particular industry.
And I'd love to get to that topic here in just a second. And you were mentioning another, a European doctor, and I'm going to butcher his name, but it's Georgian Syrup, Dr. Syrup. He had sent me an article called "The Chaotic Nature of Tattoo Ink in Europe," and he was talking about his findings of their research and how it was I think he said it was completely devoid of just like you said, of human skin, right? You know, these are scientific studies and tolerances generated from individual chemicals that aren't applicable for our uses. And because of that, it's caused a product that the majority of the tattoo artists aren't using there. And he was saying that it has created like a modern day prohibition because it's a requirement to the point where if you have to use this pigment, but the majority of tattoos aren't. So they're doing this like switcheroo, keep the pigments that they have to out front, but they're really using the other stuff in the background. Yeah. And yet they've issued and I have a screenshot of it, a 3 years imprisonment and €50,000 fine if they're caught using this stuff over here. And this creates this like scary situation where now they're always leery about using these products and having a hard time accessing them. And because it's more difficult to get them now. I mean, I was just watching a YouTube video on a gentleman that ordered some Amazon ink that was Eternal. And when he got it, it was not Eternal, right? It had the label that said Eternal, but it in itself wasn't, because he's an experienced tattoo artist. It's more like house paint. So this is not only creating a criminal activity in Europe, but it's also opening up the door for counterfeit pigments. And if they use it on the body, that who knows what that'll do, you know? Yeah, it's a whole ball of wax. I mean, it sounds like Europe's just they came at it with the wrong science and created wrong regulations, and right now they're reeling from it and dealing with it.
I mean, let me give you an example. So let's see, how many countries have I sat and lobbied on now? Six. Yeah, I think it's 6 now. Every single other country has approached this 10 times better than the European Union did. The European Union basically came in with an iron hammer and said, this is what we're doing. Shut up and take it. And every other country asked for help. The European Union did not really ask for help. They just said, this is what we're doing. And they did not take in proper account. And Jorgen Syrup, that's the dermatologist that we're talking about here. Jorgen actually released an article specific with names about the ECHA organization and REACH laws in a validated piece of writing, y'all. Like, you can go on academia.com and go find this specific article talking about the inadequacies of the European government and how badly that they did the entire tattoo industry and what type of public health crisis that they made over there. I mean, it is astonishing that there is not provisions in place to hold government or regulatory accountable for these types of actions. And almost every other country that has come to any of the organizations, any of the nonprofit groups, any of the companies, they have come with open arms, asking for help, asking for support, and they accept scientific evidence. Because here's a kicker. Here's a really funny piece of evidence. So here's an example that's pretty compelling that, I'll be honest, I found it 3:00 in the morning because I couldn't sleep because I was so disturbed about what was happening with blue and green that I went and looked up the CAS number, which is the chemical identification number, it's chemical association number of blue and green, and found other substances that were chemicals like duplicates of it. Well, guess what? The favorite green food coloring in Europe is chemically identical to the blue and the green. And guess what? It's safe for consumption there. And they didn't ban it and they didn't outlaw it. But for some reason, they decided to ban it for blue and green. And they rejected and refuted the evidence of an article that proved that it was the same. Australia didn't. Australia took it. That's why they still have blue and green. Your United Kingdom took it. They loved it. They were super happy to see something like that. They were like, oh my God, somebody that can actually speak, like science speak to us and give us what the hell we need so we can justify this. Because they were going to follow the EU's guidelines because they were like, oh, it looks like it's working there. So great. Nah. We gave them examples that were tangible, that were backed by scientific and academic evidence, and they accepted it. European Union, however, has basically just laughed people out of their courtroom and refuses to change because they think they do no wrong. And that's really sad for the tattoo community.
Yeah. Well, that's you're building the case to why the new federal law that's affecting us here in the United States is potentially well, let's say right at the gate, the alarming part is in the bill itself. It states that the FDA and the Secretary of Human Health Services has the potential to utilize and look at European Union standards. But I feel like you were saying that there's probably a little bit more, common sense here, to where the FDA recognizes the issues that's going on in Europe and doesn't want to follow suit. And so now we're getting into the MOCRA. I don't know if you want to kind of tell us a little bit more about that from your words and how that's going to affect us.
I really wanted to like what the FDA was doing. I really wanted to, because like my experience with the FDA is that particular administration has more of a hands-off approach than any other regulatory authority in the world. I know everybody thinks I'm nuts for saying that, but they have some pretty hardcore provisions in place and they take forever to do anything. Usually it's because they're scared to misstep, and words out of FDA officials' mouths is they don't want to be made an example of, really, point blank. There's a lot of intimidation for some of the administrative officials in the tattoo community or being around the tattoo community, just because like they don't understand it. And a lot of times when they see really heavily tattooed individuals, they're kind of stepping back because they've never had any experience with heavily tattooed individuals. So I took the opportunity to sit down and get to know the director of the FDA in Austria. She did come to the event and she was there learning about Tattoo Inc. And we had a pretty good conversation. The conversation basically resulted something around like, well, why do you come here to Europe to learn about Tattoo Inc. when most of the manufacturers in the United States? And she just kind of like looked at me and was like, well, this is kind of the only place that we can come to get some kind of scientific evidence that is usable or applicable to what we're doing. It's like, okay, well, are you guys willing to be transparent and actually have conversations with these manufacturers and partner with them? Or is this going to be a case where you basically bark and give orders? And she said, well, after MOCRA being pushed through, it was done while I was on vacation. I didn't know that it was happening. And my staff is only 29 people. So I don't really know how I'm going to do this because the money that they said that was in the bill that was supposed to come to my office is not there. I have no money to do this with either. And I kind of went, oh, they just shit on you. They shit on your office. They just left y'all in like the worst conditions possible as a regulator. And I don't know if anybody really knows this, but most regulatory offices are usually a bunch of really underpaid staff on limited hours who don't really get the proper support they need. And half the time, some of their equipment's broke. So they're kind of struggling to kind of just do their jobs. So then I found myself like, instead of being angry, with a whole different perspective and empathy. And then I took the opportunity to really understand and digest what was happening with MOCRA. And every time that I've read that legislation, every time I've sat down and looked at it, it's like, on paper, yeah, sure, it sounds great. Awesome. Safety substantiation, adverse events reporting, proper labeling, like just basic stuff, just really basic stuff that just needs to happen. Now it's stuff that has to happen. Where the problem is kind of erupting are some of the bits and the grimy details, like what you're talking about, how they can use the European model to kind of like cherry pick pieces of information from. That's the part that we have problems with. And I think the manufacturers that did sit and talk with the director and the conversations that we did have with her, we kind of insisted like, this European model is not working. And she also got to see it for herself in person, because some of those presentations alluded to what is happening and what's going on in Europe. And she even just had this moment of like, I don't really know how I'm going to do this. Like, are you guys going to help me? Well, yeah, duh. I want to help you because I want to see my industry thrive and prosper. I don't want to lose my products. I have people that rely on me. So how do we come up with a way to make some kind of a partnership here? And that's really where this, the critical like point of mass is the American Food and Drug officials. This is what they do. This is what that organization is for. And through partnership with the Alliance of Professional Tattooists Association, being the de facto and knowing about tattoo ink and knowing about tattoos, those two organizations together, hand in hand, are going to be the people that are going to be giving the information to the FDA that hopefully keep us out of those types of problematic areas. And it's been a lot of hard work over the last 8 years, really building those types of relationships and building that modicum of trust and trying to get to know these people and really just help them, but also partner with them. Because if you don't, we run the risk of something chaotically going wrong in our industry. And we don't have the luxury of that. We don't get a do-over button. So it takes all of us.
Yeah. No, you're so familiar with all of this, and MOCRA stands for the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act. For anyone who hasn't been doing any research on it, and then you spit out the Association of Food Drug Officials, which is also AFTO, and within it they have the Body Art Committee, which I feel like yourself, Steve Joyner, we interviewed a few months ago, was also pivotal in being involved with that. And it's really the relationships over those past 8 years you mentioned that have really helped to build strong bonds and helped get the Alliance of Professional Tattooists a seat at that table, because you're alluding to the AFTO, APT, and FDA working together, to try and navigate these regulatory hurdles of MOCRA. Not just the basic parameters, but actually the potentials of utilization of European standards. And so I'll let you tell, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to help out the FDA?
Understanding, explanations, and probably just like hands-on. So a lot of the times when the regulators come into AFTO educational conference meetings or like any of the group calls, usually they have some kind of question. I don't know. It can be anything from as simple to like, why wouldn't you allow a service dog into your tattoo area? Or what is this colorant actually used for? Or what's in this particular product? Or how's a numbing product actually work? Why does this do this? Like, most of the time, the people that are regulating our products have no knowledge, no experience, no understanding, and no real formal training. So AFTO provides a space to give them some kind of training, to give them at least like a base layer so they can understand the language, what the language means, and the impact of that language. AFTO gives like another layer to bring them back into the loop so that when something's drafted or when something's written, we can get all the best people in the room, sitting in that room and actually working on what the verbiage or what the language might be in things like the body model art code. So the body model art code is like the ideal best standards for running and operating a tattoo studio. There's another organization that is called the National Environmental Health Association. The Alliance of Professional Tattooists Association has somebody in those calls all the time, and they speak as a trained, competent person from the tattoo artist perspective. You also have body piercers in there, and you've got cosmetic tattoo artists. You have some regulators in there. It's kind of the same thing over in AFTO, except sometimes we get more FDA officials because the problems that are associated with products cover federal level. The problems that are usually going on with NEHA and that level are usually state to state, but a federal level of standards so that every state has something to work towards. So when you deal with interstate commerce, which means that you're making a product in one state and you're shipping it to another state, when you cross those lines, there's different laws that apply to those products. And a really long time ago, the FDA kind of was posed a series of questions and they didn't really understand how to regulate tattoo products. So eventually it just kind of got lumped in with cosmetics because of the color piece. And because tattoo inks have color, they call it a cosmetic. So when MOCRA happened, MOCRA was really more about the hair care industry than it was anything else. Really had nothing to do with tattoo ink, had nothing to do with our products. It just wound up kind of being like the whole bucket. Well, at dinner, sitting with this director, asking her questions, she finally blurts out, cosmetics are going to be its own entire sector of the US government. Excuse me, what? She literally said, instead of there just being a food program and a drug program, there's now going to be an office for cosmetics by themselves. That's never happened in history since 1938. That's a big deal. So the pressure that's being put on these people to regulate this product and make sure that human health and safety is the core focus, the number one thing that they do, you cannot do this without the support of organizations. And that's where my love and my desire and my intention to work in nonprofit is to help in those spaces, because sometimes it's kind of a thankless job. But, you know, if I get a regulator who actually understands something after I've explained it to them and they go home to their home state and they actually improve something, that's a win. That's a win in my book. And that's the kind of wins that AFTO provides. And you know, it's a whole bunch of acronyms when you kind of start getting down the rabbit hole. But when you really look at it, you can kind of think the practitioner side is NEHA, the product side is AFTO. And then we've got the support of those groups.
Yeah, you know, coming back, you know, you've been in the trenches for a long time, Selina, and you so used to all of these organizations and these that were, thank you for, you know, putting in all the work in these difficult relationships that are tough to understand, you know, like I said, we could spend a lot more time, but I mean, I think it's just for you. And, you know, now hearing your story and especially I didn't know anything about your history, you know, and how you started off homeless and tattooing saved your life, you know, now it really dawns on all of us, I'm sure, that it's the reason why it's so important to you, right? It's something that's so vital to you, and I know you'll continue to, you know, take your knowledge and your skills and your experience into these organizations that we're all working together on to work to save tattooing. And so I would love to, like I said, there's a lot that was said, but we have a couple of attendees in the farm. Give you all an opportunity to ask Selina some questions and see if you guys got any information you need from her.
Yeah, I would be more than happy to help donate and foster some education here, because there's a big gap. There's a big gap in our industry, and that's problematic because we haven't really figured out what type of experts and who's going to have a passion for this stuff. Like I woke up one day and realized I wanted to influence more than just tattooing, and I wanted to help out, and I wanted to give back to my community. And there's probably other people that this may be the first time that they hear this message, and they may wake up too, and they may decide that they want to take a part of their life and start doing this. So I would be more than happy to share some of that experience and that knowledge, and just promote better education, because at the root of it, really, education is the biggest thing, and that's what my passion is.
Did anyone have any questions for Selina? Kyle, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a few questions that I'm going to try and narrow down to two. Firstly, you spoke about a bunch of research that's sort of happening. I'm wondering, where is the research happening? Is it within academia, nonprofits? Is it within the cosmetics industry? And similarly, who's funding that research? And then also ask both questions because they might come together. But as a little guy sitting over here in Colorado, sort of where would I go to get involved in this kind of stuff?
First stop is always going to be the European Society for Tattoo Pigment. Number one, can't say enough good things about that organization. Number two, Carger is an academic resource that produces a lot of books. The best quality articles about tattooing have come from Carger. I would be more than happy to share some links to some of these places so that you guys can share them within the community and that you can look at them. Third is the cosmetics industry, and a lot of the toxicological human health impact or like skin things have been tested in the cosmetics industry for the last 25 years. That's been a big trope with the cosmetics industry. There are certain groups like the Cosmetics Ingredients Reports, the Society for Cosmetic Chemists that have put out research. It's kind of like all over the place. Cosmetic science is a really big deal in certain parts of the world. So some of the information that we get kind of cross conveys there in that space. So reading some of those things about products and substances, or like what's in them or what they do, or even like their function, is a really good place to start in that space too. My favorite podcast in the world is the Eco Well. I have a scheduled interview with them to talk about kind of the cosmetic science types of things related to inks. But they are amazing for anybody just trying to like wake up and type to process this information. They put a really great podcast out that explains kind of the European model and the way that the European legislation structure works. But they also get into it in such a granular detail that you can really understand it from like a human level. So those are my top picks for as far as information for anybody wanting to research or understand this stuff just in general.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have any more? Did you say you had two questions, Kyle, or is that it?
Oh yeah, I was just wondering, like, sort of what ways would I be able to get involved in this kind of stuff, just sort of as someone who's not necessarily going to have a say on the world stage, but at the more local.
Oh my God! Please, somebody come help us, please. Don't make me beg, please. Please show up to APT. Please come to our meetings. Please help on the pigment community or the pigment committee that Ben's running. We are really going to need a lot of support from everything from people like drafting responses, calling people back, scheduling meetings, writing notes, taking notes, even organizing conventions, fundraising events. I mean, there really is a lot of stuff. So like, introverts, please sign up. You don't have to talk to anybody if you really don't want to. We can find things for you to do, I promise. But at some point, really just support in APT in general is like mission critical number one. Like, you're going to learn just through that organization and being involved with that organization to be just be like the next level of yourself, really. Be a more professional tattoo artist, be a more professional business person, understanding the way that these types of committees and these types of things work. You're going to learn things about how the legislation itself actually works, what happens to a law, how laws get drafted, what happens in the Senate, what happens in the House, even what lobbying kind of looks like. That's all the type of stuff that happens in APT. And we really need support and new, young, fresh blood tattooers to come in because, I've been tattooing almost 25 years. Like, I'm an old lady in tattooing. I need to know younger people and what they're doing, and we need support because we're not going to make it if we don't band together as a community. So really, if you're looking to make an impact or just to even help out, just start with APT and just kind of follow it from there.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Any more questions?
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Selina, thank you so much. That was super informative, and it's been very much on the legislative side and gathering of information. But at the center of it, I guess it all boils down to what's in the ink, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of we're going to. So what I'm wondering is when we do this process, or when the academia and everyone else starts to study these inks, I might be asking the wrong question, or I might be phrasing it wrong. So bear with me. But
no, that's
they're
okay.
just taking the last piece of the puzzle that's packaged, right? And then they're examining that. Is that correct? Okay. So does anyone go back to any process before, like, and how does that work nowadays? Because I know when I was younger, I had a chance to meet with Phil Fairweather, and he explained a lot about his early day processes and how he would come up with red and all this other crazy stuff. And so I don't know exactly how each company has a process. Like, they get part A from this country and part B from that country, and they stick them together, and I know I'm simplifying this, but I know sometimes in chemical worlds, some people use a concentrate. Like, let's just pretend right now that we're talking about Windex. Windex might have a concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually looked at it over the last 10 years, the filler they use might change based on what they had available to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Phil Fairweather had alluded to some of this too with some of the stuff he was getting. He didn't know what he knew that the concentrate was always the same, but whatever the filler, the extra that came with it, it was always kind of a mystery, and he'd have to get it tested. So in today's ink process, how does that kind of look as far as putting all the parts together before it actually gets put in a bottle and FDA looks at it?
So you asked that the right way. You said that perfectly right. One. Two, any government agency is not permitted to accept a substance unless it's bought from like an authorized source. What that really means is they have to be able to go to the manufacturer and purchase it directly from them in order to test it. So they're not allowed to buy something off of like Amazon as like a second party retailer, from a distribution company or something like. They're not permitted to do that. They're only allowed to test like the actual substance from an authorized source. So that's a big deal. The second part of that is that's like the standard assumption in academia today. The third part about that is something that is being looked at, because most of the time the manufacturers don't have control over every single part of that. Some of that's kind of iffy. Like, some of them have control over it and some don't. So it's kind of that weird gray area where, as an industry, we don't really have a lot of clarity on that part of the process and like those individual pieces. And that's part of where some of the pressure is coming from with MOCRA, is because we have to figure out what that looks like. And we also have to figure out the steps of traceability that get into that. Because just like what you're saying, if a filler ingredient is used in that product and we don't know what that filler ingredient is, it's going to chemically change the byproduct of that product. And the final product may have some less than desirable effects, or it may have some desirable effects. We don't really know. So as far as like my realm of expertise, it had nothing to do with that specific bubble. I think that Most of the manufacturers that I've talked to, they're working on that particular part of it right now. Obviously, for good reason, they don't want to give away like where they buy their products and what the products they're using, because that's kind of like proprietary trade secret stuff. But it's also like the same space where you'll see like companies kind of headbutting, where they'll require somebody to sign an NDA just to get like the CAS number for something for like registration. So a lot of the time, the filler ingredients, we're still trying to find out what some of that is. So that's part of where the question's been, because there's cosmetic grade ingredients, and then there's like garden variety standard pigments that are used in like art supplies or things like that. And then there's like medical grade pigments, and each one of those have a different track in which that they're purchased, that they're acquired, or the substances that are in them, or levels of traceability. Obviously, if it's a medical grade pigment, that's like 40 to 50 times higher the price point. So that could drive costs up for pigments if we wind up getting to that level. We just don't really know what that is today.
Could I follow up with another question really quick?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say the future of tattooing gets to the point where it gets really foggy as far as like how this, and we look for an alternative. Mm-hmm. Is this a situation where we might be able to go back to predispersed inks, and then someone would actually just have to mix up their own? Is that even
possible?
Happening?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, that's why like you always want to make sure as a tattoo artist, like I don't think anybody can be a really great tattoo artist unless they have some color theory. Because you obviously have to evaluate like what something's going to do in skin, or at least kind of have a rough idea of what something's going to do in skin. But back to your comment with like the predispersed inks and like that, and having to mix their own inks, like say like on their own table at the time of the procedure, like they might not get bubblegum pink, but they might have red and white, and then they might mix bubblegum pink. So like the individual strengths of the colors themselves, and not something else. Cause like, I'm trying to think of another way to explain some of that to you. So,
well, let me interrupt real quick to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. I'm thinking of the old days of National and getting the powder form.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, making sure. And then what if someone yields the entire 1 pound of it and it makes X amount? Then how does that work? Are you allowed to, does this fall under like, you can make your own beer, but you can't sell it type stuff, like?
No, that actually, that was actually a big point of contingency. Like when we did have that discussion with the director, anything that's used for injectable terms, it's got to go through the standard processes of what MOCRA has aforementioned. There is no bypassing that. There is no getting around that. Even if you're an individual person who mixes your own inks, your powders into your own solutions, you're not going to be able to do that unless you adhere to the good manufacturing practices, the records, the adverse events, and the documentation and the sanitation protocols that have been laid out in the regulation. I am sad about that part of it. I'm not going to lie. That was probably one of my more favorite memories, is when I used to make inks. I long for things to go back to that at some point, because I think that was really when like we had a blend of like modern tribal, modern primitive, like tattooing really meant and felt something different back then. And unless like you're from that time frame, you'll never really get it. So not being able to make a product I see as like a good side in some ways. Like there's less issues for things like, if you put vodka in with glycerin and certain other substances, you'll make ethanol. And ethanol is a carcinogenic substance. So really, like some of those old recipes may not have been the best for our bodies. And we may not know that until today. But what science tells us and what we've seen is that it's a far safer alternative to at least adhere to standard manufacturing processes and big, clean room type facilities where, everything that goes into that room is carefully monitored, and, they do like batch testing and batch analysis before they accept anything and before it ever gets its way into the market. So that provides a buffer. As a small manufacturer, independent manufacturer making your own pigments and your own powders and your own stuff, there is no buffer. So I think that's part of what the critical point is with this legislation and how it's going to impact tattooers that have been doing those types of practices. I think that's going to impact them. And there's no. Mhm.
Hey, Selina, I'll jump in.
Yep, Russ, you're up.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Selina. Thank you. Early in the talk today, I wrote down one single note that I just want to double click on. You were talking about a recent meeting. I guess it was a call-in meeting or something where you listened to was it a presentation from the FDA?
Let me explain a little bit about that. So there's this really cool thing that our government does that a lot of other governments don't do, and that is they let their people speak and they sit uninterruptedly and they hear what the American public has to say. The FDA is required to provide listening sessions to hear what industry has to say. That can be everyone from one of you that makes your own tattoo inks all the way up to major corporations like Estee Lauder. And what happens is they prescribe a number for people that want to speak, and they give you time to speak. And they hear what your concerns are. You voice your complaints. You say, look, I've got a problem with this legislation because the way it's written is inherently harmful to my business. And in that space, you get to hear a lot of different perspectives from all over the country. Unfortunately, I was not there for the entire thing. I did speak first, and it was really more on just like an industry caveat. There was a miscommunication with us and the AFTO board where they had asked me to speak initially, but they wound up changing it, and we had to have somebody else that was a regulator speaking because of the way that our structure in that organization works. But in that listening sessions, we're going to see more of that from FDA. So as they go through the parts of the law and the legislation, they're going to provide public comment periods, and they're going to provide industry a way to communicate back. And the way that industry communicates most effectively is through organizations like the APT, AFTO, NEHA, insert other companies. They listen to that type of information because that factors in how they make a decision. Everything gets recorded. Everything goes into the Federal Register of Record. Everything gets documented, including your name and who you are and what association and what your comments are. So the people in the FDA office can actually go back to it and look at it. But just because they're looking at it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to take it, but they're going to take it in consideration. So that conversation and conversations like that are going to be happening for the next 5 to 10 years as we go through the entire legislative process with this.
Right. Okay. Thank you for the level of detail on that. I guess the question, the juicy bits that I was hoping to surface were when you mentioned that cosmetic companies tried to speak for us. Can you tell us more about what you experienced?
So what I did hear while I was on the call was hearing that Estee Lauder thought that a blanket statement for the cosmetic legislation as it was written was favorable to them. So they supported everything in the legislation. So they said all cosmetic manufacturers must adhere to these guidelines, and we think this is a great idea. Well,
right, because we're huge and powerful and have all the money.
We have all this money. Right? Yeah, exactly. So unless the industry and unless these companies go and participate in these types of organized activities that the FDA is hosting, our voices won't be heard. Our industry will not be heard. So as business owners and as individual manufacturers, or even Russ, in your situation, this impacts you directly. You can speak at these events. You can say something. I represent a body of constituents with even the Launchpad community, and weighing in what your perspective is and how that impacts you and your business and your livelihood, because people shouldn't be speaking for our industry. And we need to take those provisions and those steps and make sure that we're speaking at every opportunity that we can so that our voices are heard.
All right. Thank you.
Well said. Yeah, good question and good answer, Selina. It's definitely 100%. Yeah, I sat on that from 10 a.m. Eastern to 4 p.m. Eastern, and there was over 90 people speaking at it. Yeah, and you could hear the fear in the small manufacturer's voice, and the I guess the overconfidence of the larger companies, basically saying it doesn't matter about your company size. It's about it being consistent across the board. So definitely something we need to participate and be aware of. And again, having these conversations, being involved with the APT, which also participates with like the AFTO, the Association of Food and Drug Officials, which helps us have conversations with the FDA, which, we'll be going to the AFTO conference early next week, where we'll get to have those conversations with some of those same people and get to hear some great information and build some bridges, really heading in that positive direction. So any final questions or anything before we wrap it up? I don't want to take too much of your time. We've kind of gone over the hour now. Well, thank you so much, Selina. We do appreciate you taking the time, because like I was mentioning before, you're one busy person. I could just imagine you're doing this while you're tattooing and we can't see your arm, and you're also writing a report with the other hand, getting ready to fly to another state. So, again, I'm so honored to be able to ask you questions, work with you. We too, I think we all on this call want to protect tattooing because it's been great to us. It's taken care of us. It's done so much for us. So thank you so much. And we look forward to kind of maybe having a follow-up conversation in the future and see how some of this plays out. And we'll see how Kyle and maybe Matt's over on the APT, because I know Russ and Forrest are. And I don't know, Anna, you're an APT member yet? Definitely, let's come together and awesome. All right. It's 5-2. But no, definitely. If you guys have any more questions specifically about the APT, I'm happy to have them, as well as Selina. We'll look forward to having this come out, peers, share it with friends. We'll break it up into some good tidbits and really get some good information out to the industry, so we can all start coming together and unifying and protecting our community.
Yeah, anytime.
With that, I hope you guys go ahead. It's all Selina.
Anytime you guys need some help or some support or just like some explanation, or I don't know, highlights, note cap, because I'm really good at telling you what the hell all this crap is. Don't hesitate to shoot me a message. Find me on Instagram. I'll be putting out some blogs hopefully in the next couple of months with some more specific details, and hopefully I can come back and give you guys some more information. So anything to help our community.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah. Good point. In the description is a link to all your socials and stuff. So if anyone wants to connect you directly, they're in there. So thank you again.